Okay, let me throw some stuff out, and if you need to ask questions, then we'll open it up a little bit. In other words, if it's not completely clear, that's fine. On this retreat, when we're talking about emptiness, almost everything has to do with seeing how we construct, how the self is constructed, put it that way. It is a construct, a fabrication, in the Buddha's words. And seeing that is the reality of the self. It's a fabrication, but a little bit more than that, understanding how we fabricate, or how it is fabricated, put it that way. How the self is fabricated. Seeing that it is, and understanding how, and thirdly, learning how not to, or how to fabricate it less, how to construct it less. So when Catherine was talking last night, what was an example she used? Can't remember now.
Her writing when she was here, she used to start by...
Yeah, okay. Let's come back to that. So one of the first things is that I want to start to see when I'm suffering, when there's suffering, I'm building. I keep saying let's put it in the passive. When there's suffering, there is the constructing of self. And actually, if I really look, I cannot suffer without constructing a self. I cannot suffer without constructing a self. That suffering is supported by the building of a self. So one of the first things, just following on from Catherine's talk last night, is I want to start noticing that going on. Noticing this building going on. Doesn't necessarily mean catching it and stopping it. So I might notice it, actually I might notice it 10 years after it happened. Been through all that one. Constructed this whole thing, gone off and married who knows who. And then it's, oh blimey. And one looks back and says, gosh, that was really a construction. But sometimes you notice this, of course, with an argument with someone, or you get into a tears with someone, or with yourself about something. A little time goes by, and you think, "Wow, what was all that about?" I really it just doesn't even seem real after the fact. Did you ever have this sense of something was constructed there? The self was certainly constructed, but so was an issue. On this retreat, we're primarily talking about the self-construction, this emptiness of the personal self rather than the phenomena. We'll get into that as much as we need to, but that's not the primary focus of this retreat. So first thing is I want to start looking in that way, knowing that this is going on, and looking out for constructions. And I might catch it, as I said, after the fact, 5 seconds later, 5 years later. I might catch it during, and I might nip it in the bud. Okay, but it's that I'm building. Now sometimes we're, let's say on retreat, we're moving about the house, and you know you're in the middle of a construction. Something has got you, and the self is solid, and I've become this person or that person or whatever it is. So how then to let it die, this construction, rises up, and then how to let it die, how to stop the building process. And there's many aspects to that, but one is it probably rests on some kind of view, and we're feeding a certain view or views which feed the construction process. So, silly example I thought of in an interview today with someone. I'm walking around the house or walking outside, and I see a certain plant, I don't know, geranium or whatever, and the way I can look at it, and maybe they've trimmed it in a certain, is that the word, when you cut back the leaves? Trim? Yeah. Prune, thank you, yes, prune. They've pruned it in a certain way, and I have a bit of gardening in my history, and that is not the way to prune geraniums. This starts to really upset me. This is they really are not in the know here. The silence exacerbates it, because I can't say anything to anyone, it's coming out my ears. I know I am born as the professor of gardening, or whatever, in relationship to this poor geranium, or whatever, but also in relationship to the construct of Gaia House, etc. So the issue and the self as geranium expert or gardening expert get built together, and that gets, in this case, quite a puffed up, self-righteous, angry self, etc. And then maybe I totally get wrapped up in it. I'm stamping around the garden, fuming about the geraniums, etc. Maybe I'm going to write a letter to, hopefully not to the resident teacher, but to someone, to someone else. And maybe I won't just write a letter. I'll write, they can actually read my book. I'll send them a copy of my book. Etc. So the whole thing gets built up. So to recognize that, what does it feel like? What's the experience of the self getting constructed? What does that? How do I know? How do I know when the self is constructed? And then how can I see it there? How can I let this process die, or just stop building it so much? And as I said, one of those ways is stop feeding the views that are supporting that. So in this case, it's like you have to prune geraniums this way. That's a certain view. There's a certain view. There's actually lots of views supporting that, but one of them is that this is the way to prune, and it's wrong to do it otherwise. So sometimes identifying the views and just realizing they're just views. That's just a view, and maybe I can have a bit of space around that. So to the degree that I'm attached to this view, I'm going to be pumping up the whole construction process, right? So that's one possibility. Another possibility is, or another necessity, I would say, is a simplification of the attention. So what happens when Mr. Geranium Expert has got constructed is everything gets really complicated with theories of horticulture and this and that and the whole thing, and one's relationship with Gaia and all that stuff, and the attention is spinning at quite a complex level in terms of quite a complex story of what one needs to say and do, and how I am and my history at the university studying gardening and all this, and in that moment there's actually going to the body, there's actually quite a lot of agitation there, contraction, heat, etc. in the body. So rather than keep the attention spinning at the complex level, at the level of complexity, find something really simple to put the attention on, and the body is usually very simple. So right there in the middle of that heat and complexity, at the bottom of it, so to speak, is something simple, which is a feeling of contraction or heat in the body, or something like that. And what if I just find that, let all that complexity bubble away, and I just zero in, so to speak, on the simple thing, and I just stay with that simple thing. Now that and allowing it to be unpleasant. That simplification of the attention simplifies the whole construct. Do you understand? Because part of what's building it is me spinning the mind at the complex level. Does it, yeah. So there's not feeding the view, there's simplification of attention, and a little bit related to that, third possibility, is spaciousness and allowing of the sensations of contraction. So if let's say I've got all this reactivity going on about the gardening or whatever, come into the body and there's this contraction there, and the heat and the unpleasantness of that. If I then start reacting to the unpleasantness in the body, I'm only fueling the whole construction more. Should I say that again, or does that make sense? I go into the body, I find this contraction and this heat there. If I'm not careful, the knee-jerk reaction to that difficulty in the body will be to be aversive to it and contract around the contraction, etc. And that is part of what's building the whole construction. So if I'm going to simplify the attention and go right in there, I need to rest with the attention on that physical simplicity, but in a way of allowing. Just allow it to be unpleasant in this moment, and allow it to be unpleasant. Give it space. Give it space and allowing it. Generally, too, the factor of spaciousness is really important, because what happens when we get really complex like this is the whole mind contracts, and there's very little space in the mind. We're full of theories of gardening and letters that we're going to write and all this stuff, and the whole sense of self. There's very little space. With a lot of spaciousness, it's like things can just... It's like when there isn't space, we're putting the whole thing under a pressure cooker. And that pressure cooker is heating up more and building it more. More space, it's like just allow it to bubble, and it begins to calm down.
Can I ask a question?
Okay.
When that process happens, and then there's the sensation in the body, and there's the aversion. There's the aversion here and there, and then there's the aversion. That aversion is a thought, isn't it?
No, not only.
That's
very good, yeah.
That's where I get stuck, because is it a thought, or is it like, it feels like the aversion is part of the sensation, and it's like trying to...
Yeah, very good. We're going to get more into that, Jane, as the retreat goes on, because it's quite subtle what you're pointing to. In other words, well, we will revisit this next week, but how do I know when I'm aversive to something, and what form is the aversion taking? It's taking the form of thought. It's also taking the form of energetic reaction to something. There's just a contraction in relationship to something. So here's, let's say, a pain in my knee, and then I notice my shoulders are like this. That's telling me there's aversion. There may not even be any thought there. Maybe the thought, I've quietened that, but the rest of the body is tensing, and that's telling me that there's an energetic pushing away going on. Now the last thing he says is actually very profound, because we may or may not get more into this. At first it seems like there's the thing, and the aversion is separate to it. But when you really look deeply, you actually see the aversion is not separate, it's part of the thing itself. If we can park that for now and revisit it later, if that's okay. But I think for now, let's say, actually I'll say this more next week, it's getting familiar with what aversion feels like, understanding what it's made up of, and that can allow us to begin kind of taking it apart. Sometimes when there's aversion, it just feels like just a wodge of aversion, and actually there's more things going on there that we can take apart a little bit. So let's just fill that out a little bit. So the body tension, I've said this, I'm just saying it again, the body tension that I feel as part of that construction, I react to that. It's unpleasant. There's contraction as part of my construction of the self, and I react to that painfulness of the construction, and my reaction, I react to the painfulness of the contraction in the body. My chest goes tight, I don't like it going tight, I'm aversive to it going tight, my belly gets tight, I push that away. that pushing away is part of the whole construction process of the whole self thing. Do you understand? So what that means is that one way of kind of not building so much, letting it die, is to go, I've already said this, to go to the level of the body and actually see if I can be there without so much reactivity to the bodily level. Because that bodily level is feeding into the whole construction. It's part of the whole construction. Another obviously component of the construction, if we use that language, is the mental beliefs. Like I said, what's the view? What am I believing here? What am I believing here? So, and this has come up several times in the question and answers in the one-to-ones as well. Someone may ask a question in the Q&A, and then there's a response to that. We start measuring. Oh, I'm more further advanced than this person, or I'm nowhere near this person. And very easily the self gets constructed in a kind of comparison like that. And it's either the inflated self of I'm better than, or I'm less than. And we probably have a habit, one way or another, of constructing one kind of self or another, or both. It just yo-yos back and forth. That's very common as well. But that too will rest on a belief. What's the belief? What's the belief there? Someone opens their mouth for 1 minute and says something, and very quickly a belief comes in. It means that they're a Buddha and just about enlightened, and they're only hanging out. Everyone's actually just graciously hanging out for me without telling me that that's what they're doing. But they could easily go home now. You know, what am I believing based on 1 minute of what comes out of a person's mouth? So there's this mental component of stopping the building, actually questioning the belief. And very often we have a habit of believing certain things. So it's in my karma is the habit to believe this or that. Now, actually that's an interesting one with the comparing mind, because one of the functions of metta too is it softens the comparing mind, it evens it out. It just naturally starts to equalize between self and other. And sometimes if you feel in that situation in here or in life, metta starts equalizing out the comparing mind. I just thought of this, I'll throw it out now anyway. It's a tiny little thing, because someone asked the other day what to do about conceit. So, the judging mind, I am better than, or I am worse than. And let's say someone says something, or you just look at the way someone's sitting and you think, I am better than, or I am worse than. What about, okay, so here's the self building itself as better than this other self. What about imagining a third self that's better than you are at this thing? You know, so say you're a better, you can sit still longer or something, and you look at this person, they're fidgeting, and you could. Yeah. So self is one up on this one. Well, let's say some guy just wandered into this retreat and he's been living for the last 40 years in a cave in the Himalayas, and and they wander and they look at you and they're like, it's an interesting game to play. Actually work with your imagination with a third person who's judging you in a similar way that you're judging another one, and it actually just makes it all seem quite ridiculous. Quite ridiculous. You actually have to do it to get the feeling of the futility of the judgment. But similarly, negatively, if you're the less than, you're a less than, you see this other person, they're sitting relatively still and you feel like you can't sit still for 10 minutes or whatever. And imagine someone else here who can't even sit still as long as you can sit still. And then what happens? Same thing. Okay, so there's this possibility of kind of recognizing that one is in constructing and letting it die or stopping to feed that building process. A second possibility that Catherine was alluding to is the practice. So, if we backtrack, really good thing to just, if you want, investigate some of this construction. So that's, you're just open to investigate it in the ways that I'm talking about. Second possibility for practice now is actually the practice of staying at contact, or trying to stay at contact, and see what that does. So what does that mean? I mean, Catherine was talking about it last night, but we're aiming, in this respect, for something that we might call bare attention. Some of you might have heard this phrase before. So it's like, if I ring the bell in a second, I can ring the bell and the mind very quickly goes bell, or you hear an aeroplane, it goes aeroplane. You hear a car and it's car, or whatever. And if the mind gets too involved, it might go like, oh, that's a 1973 Ford MG, or whatever, and it's probably got this kind of, if you know about that kind of stuff. Or the plane goes overhead and it's like, gosh, what about global warming, or whatever. All of which, well, certainly global warming, that's a really important piece, I feel. But that's slightly different than the kind of attention we're going for in terms of bare attention. Now, the mind sometimes just labels, you can't do anything, but then it's like, can I come back to the bareness of the sensation underneath the label and kind of chopping off the story that goes with something? So if I ring the bell, and it's like, it takes a little bit of effort, almost keeping the mind right at the rawness, the nakedness of the sensation. If you just listen. Now, if you notice, just like paying attention to the breath, the mind stays there and it goes off, or it starts interpreting, I like it, I don't like it, they could get a deeper bell or whatever, reacting to it. And one can just bring the mind back to the rawness of the sound itself. Does it make sense? Yeah? And the kind of bare attention, beneath the words, beneath the labels, beneath the reactive, just as much as possible. So it's a practice. Like it's just a practice to stay at contact. Now,
still a cognising of it, though.
There's absolutely still a cognising, yeah, and there could well be a verbal labelling as well, but one's not getting too caught up in that. So that's just what happens, and come back to the directness of the contact, of the bareness of it. Now that could be, so right now maybe there's some sensation in your body that's prominent. So if I look in my body, well, there's a slight tension in this hip. There's actually some history of little injuries there. So, but I could just focus on that sensation and just be with the rawness, the nakedness of the sensations there, and just kind of keep chopping off, keep kind of letting go of any storyline that comes in, or reactivity, or interpretation, etc. You just keep coming back to the simple, bare attention of it. Does that make sense too? Yeah? Good. So one can do this, as Catherine was saying, in each of the 6 sense doors. And you could, depending on your personality, you could be very systematic and kind of say, right, this sitting, I'm just going to do the body, and really get into the body. Or this sitting, I'm just going to do sound, or whatever. Or go to the lunch. This lunch is taste. That's what I'm going to do. So you could break it up like that, or you could just be more freely moving, but clear what you're doing. So this bare attention, it's B-A-R-E, not B-E-A-R. two possibilities there. If we get a little bit more subtle, the attention, amazing thing about human attention, actually, maybe animals too, but amazing thing is we can direct it or have it be more open. So like right now with the bell, that's one sound that you're deciding to pay attention to and zoom in on. The zoom lens is focusing on that one thing. Or like this one sensation in the hip, I can zoom into that. Or this one taste in the mouth, I can zoom into that. So that's a real possibility, is you direct the attention to one phenomena of experience and you just try and stay there really at the contact, as bare as possible. Or sometimes, especially if you feel a little more settled in the meditation, it's quietening, maybe the meta's going well, you can kind of let the whole thing open out, so to speak. Now I could stay still within one sense door and do that. So I could, for instance right now, you just go to listening, but it's not this sound and then that sound and then that sound and then another sound. In other words, it's not so much attention getting pulled into one thing and then pulled into another thing, or deciding to go into one thing and then deciding to go into another. It's more of a global totality of listening. Does that make sense if I say that? Ruth, does it? Yeah, good. So one's listening to the totality at once. It's everything together, rather than the attention narrowing down and picking one thing out.
You were saying with the practicing the contact,
yeah,
that's alone, that's not within metta.
Yeah, very good, thank you, Miwa. So at this juncture, actually, I'd probably say on this retreat, we're separating out these two practices. So there will be times when you're practicing what we're talking about now, staying at contact, and times when you're practicing the metta. And for now, for this retreat, keep them separate. There is a way of mixing them which is actually very, very powerful, but I would rather not overload you with too much for this retreat. So they're separate.
If I get caught up with the sensation that's distressing or something,
yeah,
then I tend to just slip back into the metta just to kind of stabilise myself.
Good, very good. Yeah, that's fine. I think so. You can, very good, thank you. So you could do a whole sitting. You could actually do a whole day in one practice or another practice, or anything. The important thing is to be conscious which practice you're in at the moment. So you could also split a sitting in two. You could do more what you're saying, which is you're trundling on in one practice, and then you just veer off consciously into the other approach, maybe even just for a few moments even, but you know what you're doing, you've switched gears there, and then you move back or you stay there or whatever. So it's separating, being sure what you're doing when you're doing, for now.
Well, that's what I was doing. I was doing the contact, and whenever I got distracted, I went into the metta for a few seconds,
okay,
and then I went back.
Okay, good. So that's totally viable. It's also possible that it's just the case that feels more settling to you because we've had more time with that. There's also a way, like if I ring the bell again, and as I said, so this bell rings for quite a while. If we really everyone try and just be right at the contact with it, you will see your mind slips off it, goes back, slips off it many times in one bell ring. It's happening quite fast. So you can kind of, with this practice of bare attention, there's still something to bring the mind back to, and you bring it back to quite barely, and eventually that gets just as strong as going back to metta in terms of stabilizing the mind when it's distracted. Do I need to ring it a bell again to illustrate that, or? You just like this? Let's just see, you want me to shut up? Yeah, okay. So naturally, or normally, the mind will slip off. Even many times during that, if you're watching carefully, it goes many times on and off. No big deal. as long as that object is there, it remains an object that one can return to and kind of pay attention to. That's an option. Okay, so one might move in that mode of bare attention, staying at contact, and then one might feel it's pretty boring. There's just all this bareness. That might be a response, but I think Catherine said this. She did say it last night. It's like there also might be. The more you hang out there, the more might get revealed this sense of beauty in the very nakedness of things. A kind of sense of brightness, because one is right there with things. There's a brightness in the very attentiveness, in the sort of it's almost like things have a kind of brightness of their own, if that makes sense. There's a radiant quality to things. So at first one might think, well, it's boring, as Catherine says, nothing in it for me. But as one stays there and abides there a little bit, it actually begins to allow a kind of luminosity into the experience.
So what if you do get quite strong emotions because of what you described? When you look at the flowers, so when you notice its freshness, and you still come back to the bare attention. Should we try to let go of these emotions and try to...
Yeah. That's a good question, yeah. There's always options, Sophie, there's always options. So if I'm looking at the flower and I notice some emotions come up, the question is, first of all, are these helpful or not helpful? Now, if the emotions are coming up were the geranium professor emotions and all this stewing about that's not that helpful. Okay, and I say this is a construction that's not helpful, and one can, as I was talking about before, find ways of letting that go. Maybe staying more at just the flower it's just this visual sense of the geraniums right now, whatever. One could also, as I say, go to the bare contact of the contraction there of the feeling of the emotion, like I was saying before. If it's a beautiful emotion that's opening up, then it gets a little. You have an option of letting that go and just staying at the bare attention of the flower and just noticing that this stuff is going on around the side and just letting that go and staying more with the bare attention, or going to the bare attention of how the beautiful emotion feels in the body. Yeah? Or, if you want, because I'm a sucker for this kind of thing, you shift right out of the gear of bare attention, you just enjoy the beauty of that. And one opens oneself to that, because that's important. Yeah. So you've got these gears, and it's good as we deepen in meditation. It's like I want to explore all of those. Like what I was saying this morning, it's like, do I always tend to do one thing? And if I do, it's like, well, can I explore a bit more what I don't tend to do? I don't tend to let myself enjoy it, or I never let myself tend to enjoy it. So there's a sense of filling out the practice.
And sometimes with bare attention practice, I feel very constricted, like almost trapped by it. And my instinct is to broaden out to spaciousness. But sometimes that can be, there's quite a tension there, that almost then a bit of an aversion to coming back. Yeah.
What do you think you feel trapped by?
It's maybe a bit like, I don't know, being caught in a searchlight. Yeah. Somehow, like I'm looking at something and I can't take my eyes off it, or it's quite painful. Like there's, I suppose, maybe there might be a feeling of effort. Not that I've decided to put effort in, but somehow there's something rigid about it. Yeah, very good. Again, a bit like your question the other day about the craving that could come in. It's like it might be to explore that a little bit more. And the last thing you said could be very significant in that oftentimes when we pay attention to one thing, it starts to feel contracted because effort comes in an unskillful way. How many people have told me that trying to pay attention to the breath, as is usual on a retreat, is actually, they end up just tying themselves in knots. Because it's one object, and we try to pay attention very easily. You can see, if I'm paying attention to one object, it's like holding, it's like the mind actually literally needs to clamp around it. And in that it can just get overdone, especially if I say, it's good to do this, and then again we're constructing a self around measuring how well I do that, because this is the important thing now, we're all paying attention to this thing. The whole retreat is about paying attention to this. How silly, and yet by the end of it we'd be measuring ourselves dependent on how, so it's just dependent on what we're doing, and the self gets constructed through measurement in relation to something that we've decided is important, as I threw out the question a little while ago. What have I made to matter? So there's a process of, there's two things going there. One is just an imbalance in the effort when we attend to something. That's quite subtle, and you might want to just play with noticing that coming, kind of relax around. So it's like receiving the object, so receiving the sight, or receiving the breath, or rather than zooming into it, both. And then an added level is this, okay, now is there some self coming in here, which wasn't, I didn't hear it in your question, but I'm just kind of extrapolating a little bit. But oftentimes the self, when the self has something to do, it's given something to do, then oftentimes it starts measuring itself in terms of how well it thinks it's doing that thing. Do you understand? And then, unfortunately, what happens is that becomes so painful that we then throw out all notion of doing, because I can't go near doing. People often say to me, it's quite a big thing in practice, this idea of doing versus non-doing. And oftentimes it's not that it's coming from necessarily a very wise place, it's just that doing has got so much of a self-construction that goes with it, and so one just avoids it. And I might be missing all this insight and beauty that goes with doing, just because it's become so painful because I attach the self to it. Does this make sense? And I'm just missing that whole half of practice. There's so much beauty and so much unfolding that can go in there. But anyway, explore a little bit more. So it could be boring. It could be that one begins to sense this radiancy of things in there. Or another thing that one can begin to pay attention to is the sense that one might not even pick up at first of freedom, of a little bit more spaciousness when I'm not constructing the self because I'm staying more at contact. You may not even notice it. We're so used to constructing the self. Even in dreams we're constructing a kind of self most of the time. Walk along, move in the day, sit in meditation, constructing this self, constructing that self, a bit more, a bit less, it's coming and going. We're so used to that just to dwell at contact, is saying, I'm not going to construct it so much. It might feel boring at first, but actually that boredom itself might begin to, there's some space in here, there's some relief of not constructing. Do you understand? There's some freedom there.
It's like giving up an addiction, isn't it?
Yes. And it's an acquired, very good, it's an acquired taste as well. We're addicted to constructing. We're addicted to constructing the self, either good selves, bad selves, or both. And giving it up, and sometimes, I said in one talk, we can be addicted to constructing a painful self and a villainous self. And it's like, what is it to actually gradually, learn to let go of that to some degree, and actually realise, it's important to realise, this is why I'm mentioning this, it's important to realise actually that feels better. So the first thing might go, this is boring, there's nothing in it for me, there's no drama. When I don't construct something, I'm not constructing a drama. Here's this thing, and it means this, and it's so painful, and it's my journey, and it's always been like this, and I'm going to do it, and I'm heroic, and I'm a failure, and it's all a big drama, painful as it is. And when I let go of that, I'm letting go of the drama a little bit of constructing, and there's actually, at first it's going to seem boring, maybe, or maybe not, but with a little bit of just hanging out there, you start to feel, this is cooling, it's spacious, it's freeing, it has a free, spacious quality to it.
I'm just, do you think that that kind of addictive quality of building the self is because on some level, we think we're going to get the thing which we really want, which is happiness, from doing that. Which somehow, I don't know, it must on some level be connected to a deeper sense of our being.
What's connected to the deeper sense of being?
Well, I don't know, I guess it's an inquiry, but that sense of addictiveness towards building yourself and not wanting to sort of give it up is because it's like in any addiction, we think we're going to get something from it, but it's empty, but we still keep doing it even though we don't get the thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that, absolutely. And it's also many levels. So this it's also true that what the Buddha calls, this word that I threw out at some point, avijja, it means fundamental delusion. So we're deluded in a number of ways before one is completely awakened. We're deluded about where happiness comes from, as you're saying. We're confused about where happiness comes from. We go chasing it in all the wrong places. And one of the ways we chase it is in trying to pump up this sense of self. And that doesn't work. It doesn't lead to happiness. But there's another level of avijja which is more just we believe that the self is something real. We haven't yet seen that it's a construction. So it's kind of there's different levels in terms of where the delusion, where the addiction is coming from. You know, some is just believing that the self is real, so therefore I do what it seems like would be good for the self or feed the self. Yeah.
Could I ask a question?
Please do.
When you go to the body sensation and it feels like something, whatever, and you get a sense of it's unpleasant or pleasant or neutral, do you get a sense of that as an additional sensation to the original sensation, or is it a quality that you have sort of tacked onto it?
The pleasantness, unpleasantness, neutrality of it. What's your sense of that?
That it's possible to feel both.
To see it both ways.
There's a sort of the sensation, and then there's an unpleasant sensation sort of mixed in there.
Yeah. You can see it both ways. And that's just interesting to note. You can see it both ways. Probably what's more important, or what is important at some point, is to realize I cannot have a sensation without a vedana. Every sensation, part of that sensation is some kind of vedana tone to it. It goes with it. It's impossible to have a sensation without a vedana. Did Catherine talk? Maybe not. Let's go into it now. Vedana, it's this Pali word. It means, it's spelled Vedana. And it means sensation, or it means this feeling tone. We're going to go into it again later in the retreat, actually in much more detail. It means the sense, the quality of the texture of any experience. So whether it's pleasant or unpleasant or just kind of in between. So if I had a blackboard here and long nails, and for most people that would be the vedana of that sound, of that sensation, would be unpleasant. You understand? A songbird sings, and for most people there's pleasantness there. But we're actually going to go into it much more. I think for right now, Stu, probably what's
the reason why I ask
why are you asking?
Because if I sort of become aware of those two things and I dial more into the vedana, that seems to ease things quicker.
Can everyone hear that? Yeah. The reason for that is probably because
when you're, as you say, dialing more into the vedana tone, the unpleasantness or whatever, you're more fully aware of that and reacting less to it. Whereas if you're dialing more into when it feels like they're more separate, it's like there's some reactivity going on to the vedana kind of at the side that you're not so much monitoring or allowing to quieten. When you go directly to it, you're kind of quietening the reactivity more because you're right there.
Yeah, and then I can also sit there and it's unpleasant. Oh, it's passing away, it's pleasant. Oh, it's passing away, it's neutral.
Uh-huh.
Oh, it's passing away, it's unpleasant.
Yeah.
Oh, it's passing away, it's neutral.
Yeah, very good. So we will get into that tomorrow already. It's the impermanence of things. And we're going to start that. Yeah, that's really. We can talk about it tomorrow. If that feels okay. Yeah. So could be boring. Could be this sense of beauty in it. As I say, a sense of the luminosity of things begins to reveal itself because I'm not layering all this other stuff on top of everything. It's like the very nakedness itself begins to be, the brightness of life begins to be revealed. Or I could start to notice that when I don't feed this addiction, when I don't construct a self so much, that actually feels like a relief. It feels there's freedom and there's spaciousness in there. And actually to start noticing that, because it's something we might overlook. So that's also in the mix there. Okay, last piece I was going to throw out just a little particular piece is in relation to the mind door, which is as Catherine mentioned, there are 6 sense doors in the Buddhist sort of system. So you've got the sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, right? The five we're used to, and then the mind is the 6th one. And so an image in the mind or a thought that goes through the mind. These are perceptions and sensations at the 6th sense door of the mind. Do you understand? You're aware of a thought.
Is not awareness one of the senses?
Awareness is not a sense. It's more you can where the Buddha would discuss. You can have there's 6 awarenesses, and there's awareness of sight, awareness of sound, awareness of. You can break it down that way. So awareness of the mind, awareness of the contents of the mind. So awareness is what's aware of something or other.
It's something that I'm always questioning.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't worry about it for now.
Okay, but bring it up again, because someone else asked similarly. Again, it's the sort of thing that I wasn't in terms of the curriculum for this retreat, I wasn't going to get into it. But if it's coming up for you guys, ask, and I'm happy to go into that. It just won't be part of what I'm... But if it feels like it's alive and you want to ask again at some point. Yeah? Okay. So... It's hard to have bare attention to a thought. Thoughts are so quick, so subtle, and so slippery, and seductive, and snake-like. And so one of the things that can help a little bit is working. Remember I said there were 2 modes. You could be more directed or more open in the attention. One of the things that helps is allowing things to be more open. So when you feel more settled, maybe the meta's going well, and you might switch gear and be more open to the totality. One thing in particular that can help is spending a little time in the openness of listening. And again, as I said, not this sound and then that sound and then another sound, but more like just seeing if you can kind of relax back into the totality of just hearing. It's like the awareness is just receiving. We maybe do guided meditation on this later at some point or something. And just dwell with listening, and there's a kind of openness to the awareness. It's just sounds arising and passing, and there's that openness there.
Would the listening include listening to
it will start to get, at first, just make it actual aural listening. So at first you're just mostly interested in actual listening. You're still aware of the body, so you keep anchored in the body as always anchored in the body. And then you're opening up the space and just, okay, the crows, another bird, this, and you're aware of the totality, someone shuffling, etc. And what that does, because sounds come from different directions and distances, I start to open to that, and it just starts to open up the whole space of the consciousness a little bit, just naturally, just allowing the listening and the hearing. It's very receptive mode, allowing. It's like the opposite of this. Yeah. As the space opens up and you hang out, and it's just like sounds coming, sounds going. Also, just with the bare attention of sounds. I'll repeat this at another time, but it's just a small step from there. At some point you'll start to realise that thoughts get included, as Jackie was saying. One actually notices, oh, it's the same with thoughts, they're just like sounds. And there's this kind of bare attention to the arising of thought without getting sucked into it so much, just like a sound. Bird chirps, pen scratching. It's just textures of sound in the space, a thought passing through. And that tends to be much more helpful because there's not this hooking on to a thought. Usually what happens, a thought goes through the mind, we immediately hook on and we're dragged who knows where by it, very quickly. So with this spaciousness, it's almost like just witnessing a thought as a thought. It's just a thought. Like the bell, it's just a sound. The texture of it. The thought's much quicker, that one just gets a sense of a thought just as a thought. It's just an event there. But the listening can begin to help if you find just settling into that listening. I'll repeat this because it goes more with where we're moving to later as well. Okay, that was what I wanted to communicate. Are there more questions, or is that good, or?
Clarify something you said to Stu. You said that there's always a vedana with any sense.
Yeah.
Is that even when you stay at bare contact?
Yes, very good. So, yes, there is. Any experience, in other words, any perception, any experience, any sensation has a vedana tone with it. Staying at bare contact, as Stu was saying, it's like you can decide to pay attention more to the vedana quality that's with something, or you can decide to be more, let's say, like I'm looking at this grid on this microphone, I could be really kind of focused on the experience, or I could start to notice more. I said it's neutral at first, but actually the more attention I give it, it starts to, funnily enough, become subtly pleasant. So I'm tracking more the vedana in my awareness, or I'm tracking more the sensation, but both are actually mixed together. You cannot separate them. What happens? It's like, so when with that, if we use this language, staying at contact or bare attention, if that starts to looking at the microphone, neutral, and I start to go, it's pretty boring, and then I start drifting off or feeling like I don't want to be bored, and then this whole thing comes, or it starts to get pleasant or unpleasant. I think that's not as nice as the microphone I used to have when I was living in the States, and it was a really, I'm off now, and that's not a very good example. But let's say a pain in the knee. You're sitting in meditation. There's a pain in the knee or a pain in the hip or back or whatever. That moment of contact has a vedana with it. It's unpleasant. Pain has to be unpleasant. What happens, as Catherine was saying yesterday, out of the vedana comes craving and clinging. I want to get rid of this. Okay, that's normal when there's pain. It's normal. We can get carried away with that in terms of a whole bunch of thinking comes in, a whole bunch of reactivity. We start fuming with anger, we hate the retreat, we think we blame ourselves for having a painful body. Then we've really built this, we've really constructed the self. So this idea of constructing the self, there's a spectrum to it. I could be doing it really, really a lot, gone completely bonkers with it. Or a little bit less, or a little bit less, or a little bit less. If I'm sitting here, here's this pain in my knee right now, on my hip right now, and I pay attention to it, and I can have a sense there's unpleasant Vedana, and then I begin to feel, this relates to Jane's question, I begin to get a sense also, I'm just thinking, do we want to go here now?
Yeah.
Who's who's getting confused? Is it too much? You are confused. This working more with Vedana directly is something we're going to get to next week. Okay, but I'll put it out now a little bit. Just trying to think. Give me a second how to formulate this without confusing. If I stay at the contact with this sensation, I'm just aware there's unpleasant sensation. I might feel a tug or a push away, okay? But I just notice that there's a push away, and I keep bringing the mind back to the bare sensation of it and the bare unpleasantness of it. And I'm not really investigating that tug any more than noticing it's there and trying not to give into it, just coming back more to the bareness of things. Yeah. Later next week, we will start working directly with the tug itself, with the craving and the aversion. That ends up being very powerful. But for now, it's more working with just noticing that there's a tug there. There will be a tug anytime there's unpleasantness, and coming more back to just a sensation, not giving into the tug, not energizing that rejection, that pushing away. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really noticed that actually, because I used to have very severe chronic back pain for a long time. So that reactivity to pain sometimes is quite strong, and I noticed when I was tuning into a feeling of pain in like my hip area, and almost automatically it would be like pain, flashing pain. Yeah. And instead of listening to that label, I just went into the sensation.
Very good, yeah, very good.
And it was just like an achingness, and I didn't put the label pain on it. And it kind of just was there, and then it kind of dissolved.
Excellent.
So it was fascinating to watch that.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So in that sense, one's getting underneath the reactivity, and then also trying to get underneath the label, this word pain. So, so you have to be careful when you start me talking about emptiness, because there's a way too that labeling builds experience. Okay, not just well, all kinds of things build things, and so sometimes that this word pain is not a neutral word. It's a very charged word. It's like throwing a grenade in there. See what that does. I put this word in, and it does something to the whole experience. It also does something to the self, because when I build up this issue of my pain, I also end up building myself. I'm the one who has this pain. I'm the one with the history of the pain. I'm the one with the projected future of the pain. I bet no one else has pain. Or the comparing mind. The whole. Do you see what I mean? The whole show gets constructed together. Everything gets constructed. Now, when you do that, Nina, when you do that, I think for now, wanting to be, what happened was, you said, it just became an aching. In other words, it's just unpleasant Vedana, and one might be aware of the tug away from it, but it's actually just unpleasant Vedana. It may just stay like that, but then there's a lot less suffering there.
Yeah,
there's a lot. Very good. Yeah, a lot less suffering. There's also a lot less self being built around it. Right? It's just some pain. It's just some pain. That's what I mean. It's just this. It's just this contact. It's just this thing. But then you said, then it just dissolved. Now that actually turns out to be extremely interesting in terms of emptiness, but I'm not going to say anything about it. This is where, do you remember, right, I think it was the first talk or something, I took there's emptiness of the personal self and emptiness of phenomena. Do you remember I just made that distinction? So this retreat we're dealing mostly with emptiness of personal self. But I was curious, breaking it up that way, how much the emptiness of phenomena will come out in terms of your guys' experience, and you will start just saying, well, this happened or whatever. And so I'm happy to include that, as I said, in the Q&As and stuff. But maybe it's enough for now, or it's enough. Yeah, Penny's feeling. Yeah. Is that okay? So that piece we can revisit if it feels like it's relevant. Okay. Let's just have a bit of quiet together.